The passage for today's scripture reading is taken from Philippians chapter 2, verses 14 to 18. Philippians 2, 14 to 18. Do everything without complaining or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a crooked and depraved generation, in which you shine like stars in the universe as you hold out the word of life, in order that I may boast on the day of Christ that I did not run or labor for nothing. But even if I am being poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I am glad and rejoice with all of you. So you too should be glad and rejoice with me.
Okay, good morning, everyone. It's good to see you. It's good to see you through a new pair of glasses. This whole season has been such a strain on the eyes that I had to get a pair of glasses just to protect from the glare. I'm also told that there's research that suggests that people who wear glasses are more trustworthy. So I'm hoping that this will have an even more impact on the sermons that are preached. But yeah, it's just another example of how strange this season is and how counterintuitive it is to meet one another in this way. It's completely, in some ways, it's comforting, but in other ways, it's completely unsatisfying. This is just not the way human beings are designed to interact with one another. So it is sad. But let me begin with the childhood confession. When I was a child, I didn't imagine myself becoming a pastor. I always imagined that I would become a movie star. That was always my goal. I had a little register, those long registers with rules, with lines, and I wrote down a 20-year career in which every year I would produce a movie, and every now and then I'd win an Oscar, once in a way. It just happened to be that way, and that was my ideal. And I remember going when I was in my 20s. I went to LA. I went to that Hollywood Walk of Fame, and I saw all those stars on the ground, and it left me a little bit underwhelmed. It wasn't really as satisfying as I thought it would be. But what I didn't know at the time is that Jesus also wants us to live like stars, but not the Hollywood kind of star. Not with that kind of glory, not with that kind of satisfaction. He wants us to be a different kind of stars, because a different kind of star. And there's the old saying about stars, right? The stars shine brightest in the dark, and you can only see the stars at night. And well, not in Delhi, but in any other city, you can only see the stars at night. And we are living in darkness. We are living in a time of darkness. And let me just try out a little thought experiment with you. Okay, so I want you to imagine a city that is built on the backs of the poor. I want you to imagine a city in which greed and corruption perpetuate the financial system. I want you to imagine a city in which, if you question the status quo, you may lose your life. I want you to imagine a city where the children on the street are left to die without anyone to rescue them. I want you to imagine a city where justice is a fantasy for the vulnerable. Imagine a city where political rulers are seen as messiahs and saviors. Imagine a city where the culture is comfortable with reducing women to sexual objects for the consumption of powerful men. I want you to imagine a city where the body itself is seen as an instrument of self-gratifying pleasure, not an offering of worship to God. Imagine a city where Christians are a fraction of the population and are seen as a disruption to the traditions of the past and the ambitions of the future. What city are you imagining? Yeah, I'm talking about ancient Rome. That's what I'm imagining. And Philippi is a city that is a Roman colony. It's populated by army veterans. And this is the Roman Empire in which Christians are living. And the question I want to ask today is, how do you live in a city like this, in a darkness like this, without being consumed by the darkness? How do you shine as lights in a city of this nature? And how do you do that? Because I want you to know, I mean, sometimes today when people think of Italy, they think of, amore or cappuccino or pizza and vacation and going to see the Colosseum. But I want you to remember, do you know what was happening in the Colosseum before it was in ruins? There were Christians being persecuted. It was the playground for persecution. And in the Roman, there was a revolt by a slave named Spartacus, which is popularized into a movie. And it was a slave revolt that was subdued by Rome, and the 6,000 remaining slaves were crucified along a highway called the Appian Way, from Rome all the way to southern Italy. So imagine if you were taking that road from Rome down to southern Italy. On either side of the road, there would be crucified slaves. That's Rome. That's ancient Rome. And in a sense, there's a weight of darkness that the Christians lived with in this time. And the question is, how do you live in a time like that without losing your faith, without losing your mind? How do you bear the weight of that darkness without collapsing into it? And we're going to see three things. We're going to see the three things are needed: our devotion, our display, and our deliverance. Our devotion, our display, and our deliverance. So first of all, Paul says, do all things without grumbling or arguing. Now, this is very interesting, because this do all things is not an arbitrary do all things. This is not, hey, when you go into the traffic, don't grumble about the traffic. Or when you go to work, don't grumble about your boss. It's not an arbitrary do all things. This is a reference to the Old Testament and to Jesus's last words to his disciples. So if you are reading the Exodus Bible plan, even just this morning, you would have read in Exodus 24, where it says, when Moses went and told the people all the Lord's words and laws, they responded with one voice: everything the Lord has said, we will do. Everything the Lord has said, we will do. And Moses then wrote down everything the Lord had said. Now, Jesus' last words to the disciples are, therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Now, this is important, because doing everything is actually what is doing everything that Jesus has commanded us to do. Now, I know some of you are thinking this is difficult, and if you're not a Christian, and you might think that this is difficult, I want you to know it's not difficult. It's impossible. It's impossible. However hard you think Christian life is, I want you to know it's harder. It's harder than that. Imagine whatever difficulty you think is there in the Christian life. No, it's harder than that. And that's why G.K. Chesterton used to say, Christianity has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found difficult and left untried. And this is an expression of worship, where we are trusting in Jesus and to do everything he has commanded, because we know as a response that he has done everything for us. So this is coming after what Paul has described Jesus has done for us. He has given us everything. So he commands us to obey everything. Now, I want to kind of frame this in three worlds: in the ancient world, in the Roman world, and in the present world. See, in the ancient world, there was a god for everything. So if you were going out to get water from the river, this was not just a simple exercise, right? This was a complicated procedure. This was a way in which you'd have to go through the fields, through the forest, to the river. Now, there's a God for all of those things. There's a God of the river, there's a God of the fields, there's a God of the forest. So you had to go through these things without offending any of the gods and trying to appease them. It's a very complicated procedure, because this is a polytheistic culture. There's a God for everything. And into this worldview, the Bible writers introduced the idea that God is Lord over everything. There is one God over everything. There's no aspect of reality that's beyond his domain. So if you're reading the Exodus Bible plan with us, we're now starting to get into the law. And this is the part that no Christian likes to read, right? Because it doesn't make any sense. What's going on here? This is the most boring part of the Bible. There's no logic. There doesn't seem to be any linear logic, but there is a non-linear logic to the laws of the Old Testament. So you'll see sometimes the laws in one passage will go from instructions for the temple to mildew in the kitchen, to what to do if your donkey falls into the pit, and to some embarrassing bodily functions for male and females. And you wonder, like, what on earth is going on? Why is it going from here to there and here to there? And it just doesn't seem to be any logic, but there is a non-linear logic. And the logic is this: it's training the people of God to relate every single aspect of life to God. Every single aspect of life is, we're being trained to relate every single aspect of life to God, because there is no nook and cranny of the universe that doesn't belong to Him. And we're being trained to see life that way, that He is the Lord of everything, and we are invited to do everything that He has commanded. Now, this rubs against every middle class instinct, right? It rubs against all middle class ambitions and all middle class aspirations of finding someone to get married to, settling down, having kids, and just being comfortable. It pushes against all those middle class aspirations and ambitions, because it's intruding into our personal space. Like, we've got personal space, right? Everybody's got personal space, and you don't want Jesus in your personal space, right? You want to choose how much space He has. So it pushes against all our middle class instincts. It's not comfortable. And I want you to know, in the Roman world, it was no different. In the Roman world, it's different in a sense. In a Roman world, you had one Lord over everything, which is similar. But this one Lord was not God. This one Lord was Caesar. Caesar is Lord over everything. And into that Roman world, the Christians entered and said, no, Jesus is Lord. Remember, in the early Christian, the first century, about 25,000 Christians. And they are standing up to Rome and saying, no, Jesus is Lord, not Caesar. Do you see now why what was happening in the Colosseum was happening? How did 25,000 Christians get the courage to challenge the Roman Empire and say, no, Caesar is not Lord, Jesus is Lord? They're doing it at the risk of their own lives, because they're committed to do everything He has commanded, because they'll do anything for Him who has given everything to them. They will do anything for Him who has given everything to them. Now, in the modern world, you might think we're relieved from these ridiculous notions of gods and religions and worship. We're not like that. We're not. We're enlightened. We're informed. But I want you to know, you are a worshiper. You are a worshiper. You were designed to worship. You can't not worship. You can only choose what you worship. So we may not believe in Baal, we may not believe in Mammon, we may not believe in Molech, we may not believe in Hercules or Zeus or Eros, but we live for money, for power, for beauty, for desire, for control, and we build our lives around them. We still do that. And we make sacrifices for the things that we long for. We do that. We make offerings in order to get the things that we want. We do that. We're worshippers. And I want you to know, this is not just a religious idea. This is not just a pastor saying these things. I want you to read a passage to you from a speech that David Foster Wallace gave as a commencement speech to graduates. It's called "This Is Water." You can look it up online. And I'm going to read some parts of it. And here's what he says. He says, in the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as atheism. There is no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. If you worship money and things, if they are where you tap real meaning in life, then you will never have enough. You will never feel like you have enough. Worship your body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before they finally grieve you. Worship power, and you will end up feeling weak and afraid, and you will need ever more power over others to numb you to your own fear. Worship your intellect, being seen as smart, and you will end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out. But the insidious thing about these forms of worship is not that they are evil or sinful, it's that they are unconscious. They are default settings. They're the kind of worship you just gradually slip into day after day, getting more and more selective about what you see and how you measure value without ever being fully aware that that's what you're doing. You are a worshiper. And the question you need to ask is, do you know whom you're worshiping? Do you know what you're worshiping? Do you know what it's doing to you? I'm not asking you what you believe, because we all believe the right things. I'm asking you what you worship, what you build your life around. What's your everything for which you'll do anything? What is your one thing without which you feel like nothing? That's worship. That's where the answer to worship is found. And now look at what Paul says next. He says all this, do everything without grumbling or arguing. I love how he anticipates that the objection is not going to be rational. It's going to be personal. Because the resistance to worship, the resistance to doing everything doesn't come from intellectual reasoning. It comes from the heart. Because there's got to be some of you who are thinking, oh, but what about this? But what about that? Oh, no, I don't like this. I don't want that. There's got to be some of you who are thinking that, who are feeling that. And I love how Paul anticipates that, because the resistance to worship does not come from the mind, it comes from the heart. And this grumbling and arguing is a throwback again to Exodus. It's a throwback to the Israelites in the wilderness. They've just been delivered from Egypt. They've just seen the miracle of the Red Sea parting. They've just been delivered from the worst oppression of their lives. And their immediate response to that is they grumble, and they say things, if only we had died there in Egypt. There we sat and ate and we had all that we wanted to eat. But you have brought us here. The language of grumbling is the language of regret and kind of deceptive nostalgia. You think back to those days as if they were better days, even though rationally they were not better days. It's a deceptive nostalgia. And the language of grumbling is the language of blame. We've got someone to pin our blame on. That person is to blame. What about them? What about that? And sometimes that person is God. And that's what the grumbling was. It was grumbling and arguing against God and against Moses. And in some sense, in this season, right? In this season, there's so much to be tempted to be grumbling about, and so much to be tempted to arguing with God about. And you'd be inhuman, you'd be non-human if you didn't have days where you fell into this. I've had days where I fell into this. And I want you to know, in the Christian story, it's okay to lament. It's okay to bring our grumbling to God in the sense of offering to him of how we're feeling. But it's not okay to resist him. It's not okay to resist him with our hearts because of something that we want or some expectation that we have that was unmet in the past or is likely to be unmet in the future, or is even unmet right now. And so I want to move on to the second thing. The second thing that will keep us shining like stars in the sky and not blend into the darkness or collapse into the darkness is our determination. And look at what Paul says here. He says, do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God, without blemish, in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. Now, there's two obstacles there and two opportunities. So let's talk about the obstacles. There's the internal obstacle, which is the grumbling, which we've just talked about. And I want to give you a picture of this. I mean, but first of all, we're living in the golden age of grumbling. I mean, you go on Twitter and Facebook, the first question they're asking is, what's going on? What's happening? And you're immediately tempted to tell them, I'll tell you what's going on. I'll tell you what's happening. It's all bad, and I want the world to know. So we're living in the golden age of grumbling. But now I'm working on a book proposal to present to a publisher, and part of the process is to identify why this book is different from the competition. So you got to know your competition. You got to know who's out there and why this is different. And in many ways, our grumbling comes because the allegiance to God has competition. And the question you've got to ask whenever you find yourself grumbling or questioning is, what is the competition? Because whenever I find myself grumbling and arguing, whenever I find myself in that cycle, it's because there's something that I want more than I want to trust God. There's something that I want more than I want to trust God. There's something I fear more than I trust him. There is competition. And without knowing the competition, we can't overcome that obstacle. But there's a second obstacle. The second obstacle here is a crooked and twisted generation. Now, we live in a world that is set against God and his Messiah. We live in a world that's set against that. And if you have trouble trouble with that. We want to ask you something. Have you ever told any of your friends at work that you're a Christian, that you believe the Bible, that you believe Jesus is the only way to God, that maybe you believe in angels, that Jesus died and rose again from the dead, and that he's coming back one day? How do you think that would go? How do you think that would be received? There's the crooked and warped generation is not a description of actions. It's a description of a kind of attitude towards God. It's a general description of people who turn away from God, and they turn to other gods like money or power or beauty or intellect or anything else. And it's a reference again to Israel in the wilderness. And here's because I want you to see the language and the similarity here. So Deuteronomy 32:5, God says they are corrupt and not his children. To their shame, they are a warped and crooked generation. And then he asks the question, is this the way you repay the Lord, you foolish and unwise people? Is he not your father, your creator, who made you and formed you? Is essentially, and the obstacle is that we're living in a world where we give in to the world. We find ourselves either fascinated by the world or we find ourselves fearful of the world, and we collapse into it. And this is the obstacle we live in. And the sad thing about Israel, is that they were delivered from Egypt, but they did not want to escape their own desires. They escaped slavery from Egypt, but they would not escape slavery to their own desires. And that's the tragedy over there. And Paul is now inviting us to an opportunity. And here's the opportunity. There's two responses that God gives to this internal obstacle of grumbling and questioning and the external obstacle of the world that we live in. And it's a surprising kind of response, because God's response to the challenge is not an explanation. It's not a philosophy. God's responses to these challenges from within and without are a kind of person and a kind of people. A kind of person and a kind of people. So he's talking about a child of God without blemish, without fault, someone who is in his father's likeness, someone who bears the likeness of Christ, someone who is just like his elder brother or her elder brother. And you see this, and this is important because you want to recognize that God's immediate answer to evil within is not a philosopher; it's an overcomer. God's immediate response to evil is not a philosopher; it's an overcomer. That's why in Romans 12:21, which is the motto of my school, Mount Carmel School, so I've got it etched in my brain. I can't ever forget it. Do not be overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. See, this is important because when you're living with evil, when you're faced with evil, when there's no time for explanations. There's no time for trying to wrap your mind around what's going on and why is this happening. When evil comes against you, it needs to be fought. It needs to be overcome. I mean, if a thief breaks into my house in the middle of the night, I'm not going to go out and call somebody and find out why is this happening? Who was sleeping? Was the guard sleeping? Was the lock? Who's to blame? I'm not going to be doing that. I'm not going to be calling somebody and saying, this is not supposed to happen. Why is this happening? I'm not even going to sit with the thief and say, explain your reasons to me. Why are you here? I'm going to want to defend my family. I'm going to want to defend myself. I'm going to find some weapon in case that person's dangerous. Because when evil comes against you, the first immediate response is not to reason with it, it's to overcome it. And Paul is describing an overcomer, children of God without blemish, unstained, untouched by the corrupt and wicked generation that we live in. Untouched. And that's why, and Jesus gives this promise to Christians. He says in Revelation 3:21, to the one who is victorious, I will give the right to sit with me on my throne, just as I was victorious and sat down with my Father on his throne. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. We are invited to be overcomers. And that's the outcome of knowing that we are children of God. That we sense evil, we know it's there, we feel the weight of it, but our posture is to be determined to overcome it. And it's ironic that Paul is calling Gentiles to do what Israel could never do. This is a former nationalist calling Gentiles and foreigners and outsiders to do what the insiders could never do. It's fascinating. The second response to external challenge is a kind of people. He says that you will shine among them like stars in the sky. I love the NIV translation better. You will shine among them like stars in the sky, like stars in the universe, actually. And uh, the thing about light itself is that light is really captivating. It's one of those things that does what it's supposed to do by being what it is. It does what it's supposed to do by being what it is. That's the nature of light. So and that's what Paul is calling us to do. He's calling us to do what we're supposed to do by being what we are. We are children of God. And by being what we are, we can do what we're supposed to do. It's a beautiful picture, and light is captivating. I remember when I was a child. I won't tell you how old because it's embarrassingly old, but I was fascinated by this thing called the glowworm. I don't know if you remember glowworms. They're these tiny little things that were luminous. So you hold them in front of a bulb for a little bit, and then you turn off the lights, and it just shines next to your bedside table. And I used to go to sleep very comforted at the thought that there's a glowworm sleeping next to me. It's captivating. Light in the darkness, even a little bit of light in the darkness, is captivating. It's beautiful, like stars in the night sky. Beautiful, and that's what. Paul is inviting us to, but there's a reason why he does this. Again, this is a pull back from the Old Testament. In Daniel chapter 12, Daniel says, those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like stars forever and ever. Those who lead many to righteousness like stars forever and ever. Now, in ancient times, stars were used to navigate your way when you were lost. They didn't have GPS, they didn't have Google Maps, they didn't have any of that. They had the stars in the sky. And if they were lost, they would look to the stars in the sky and they would try to find and navigate their way to find themselves. And you've got to think about the crooked and wicked generation, the crooked and warped generation that we're in. In English literature class, I was introduced to the term zeitgeist. And zeitgeist is a German word which means the spirit of the age, the spirit of the age. And the spirit of the age that we're living in is a self-referential age. The only reference to authority is to the self. So an analogy I just, Shruti's father sent to her was this picture of somebody who wants to go to Dehradun. Now, typically, if you wanted to go to Dehradun and you didn't know the way, you would ask somebody for directions. You would pick up your Google Maps, you would set the location, and you would try to go there. But in a self-referential age, if you want to go to Dehradun, you don't ask anybody. You just go. And you just go. And you may end up in a city and you may not know whether it's Dehradun or not, but you will call it Dehradun. This is Dehradun because I say it is. And now imagine a world in which everybody is doing that. Everybody is self-referential and looking and finding their way with reference only to themselves and declaring whatever it is, declaring things to be whatever they want them to be. It's like in the Old Testament where Israel came to the point where the Bible says everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Everyone did what was right. And that's what happens then is everybody is lost. And there's this movie Begin Again in which there's a song by the lead singer of Maroon 5, and he sings these lyrics, right? He says, God, tell us the reason youth is wasted on the young. It's hunting season and the lambs are on the run, searching for meaning. But are we all lost stars trying to light up the dark? Are we all lost stars trying to light up? And Paul's answer is no. No, if you're a Christian, you don't get to be a lost star. You are the star that leads people home. When you shine brightly in the dark night sky, when you are untouched by this generation and you rise and you are determined to overcome evil with good, you shine like stars and people look to you to find their way home. They find their way home. That's the witness of a Christian life that we're called to. Again, this pushes against middle class ambitions and middle class aspirations of a comfortable, secure, safe, stable, unthreatened lifestyle. Very hard for middle class people to be Christians. It pushes against every instinct. But there's also one more reason that Paul gives. He says we're also the proof that Christ is risen. It's a very interesting story of Octavian, who is Julius Caesar's son. Now, if I asked you, who has died, who is the Son of God, who has died and who has been raised and taken to the heavens to be seated at the right hand of God? If I ask you that, you'll think, oh, you're talking about Jesus. But if you go to Rome and you provide that description, they'll say you're talking about Octavius. You're talking about Octavian, because Octavian declared Julius to be a god, Julius Caesar to be a god, declared himself to be the son of God, and said that when Julius Caesar died, he rose, he ascended to the heavens and sat down at the right hand of the supreme God. And the evidence for this, was that at the funeral of Julius Caesar, there was a light that shone in the sky, a comet that flew in the sky, and that to him was evidence that Julius Caesar is in the heavens with God. And what we should take from this is that Christians, that God's response to a dark world, or God's evidence of himself in a dark world, is Christians who shine like lights in the dark sky. His evidence is not a philosophy. His evidence is not an explanation. His evidence is a people, a living, breathing people who are proof of a risen Christ, and who, if they were followed, will lead people home. So how do you do this? How do you become that kind of person? And finally, I'm going to close with our deliverance. Paul says, among whom you shine like stars in the sky, holding fast to the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I may be proud that I did not run in vain or labor in vain. Even if I am to be poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with all of you. Likewise, you all should be glad and rejoice with me. Now, I'm just going to focus on the first two phrases in that verse: holding fast to the word of life, so that in the day of Christ. So, those who overcome evil with good are also those who are overcome by the goodness of Christ. Those who overcome evil with good are those who are completely overcome by the goodness of Christ to them. The word of life is that he has delivered us for the day of Christ. He has delivered us for the day of Christ. Now, Christians are a remembering people, are a rejoicing people, and a receiving people. We're a remembering people, a rejoicing people, and a receiving people. We remember what Christ has done. And we rejoice today, we rejoice now, we rejoice in this darkness, in the present phase. Through the way of lament, through the way of prayer, we come to joy and we rejoice. We rejoice at our future hope. And one day we will receive our future hope. We will receive it on the day of Christ. And this is, again, this is pulling back from Daniel. In Daniel chapter 12, Daniel says, at that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. There will be a time of distress, such has not happened from the beginning of nations until then. But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. So I want you to know two things about the day of Christ. The day of Christ is coming. The day of Christ is coming. I mean, before there was GPS, if you wanted to go to somebody's house, they'd call you on the phone and they'd give you directions, and you'd take a piece of paper and you'd draw a map without any scale. So the buildings are the size of a ball and the roads are the size of a line, and there's no scale, but you draw this thing and they'd give you landmarks. They'd give you landmarks for on the way. And then you're driving, you're using this piece of paper to find your way. And if you saw any of the landmarks, you would know that you're on the right track. You would know that you're heading there. You would know that you're on the right, that the place that you're going to is coming. And I want you to know, if you ask me, do I trust Jesus more or less in this season of a pandemic? I want to tell you, I trust him more, because the world is going just as he said he would, just as he said it would. Wars, rumors of wars, famines, earthquakes, plagues, what's happening in the world, everything is just as Jesus said it would happen. I've got more reason to trust him now. So it seems to me that the day of Christ is coming. All the signs are pointing to that fact. Now, don't play the game of when is he coming. Okay, don't do that. Don't be that kind of Christian. That's weird. You don't read Revelation to find out when he's coming and all that. That's just not what the book is for. But the day of Christ is coming. And the second thing is that the day of Christ is a day of judgment. It is a day of judgment. And if not for Christ, we would all be found wanting. Now, and you might think judgment is a difficult thing to talk about. I actually think this is the easiest generation in the world in which to talk about judgment, because everybody is judgmental. Everybody thinks there's somebody in the world who should go to hell. Everybody. We've never had a generation so angry. We've never had a generation with so much outrage. We've never had a generation with so much of cancel culture. Never. It's never been like this. It's never so vocal, so visible, so in your face. And there's an episode in Modern Family where Modern Family is a show about three unique families, and so there's one in which the older the father is, his name is Jay, and he's taking out his stepson for a golf game, and he's taking him out on a Sunday morning when when his wife is in church and he is not. So he's skipping church and going out to the golf course, and his son is a bit concerned, and he asks him, aren't you afraid of hell? Aren't you afraid of what will happen to you? And Jay says, oh, you know what, I'm going to break some news to you. There's no such thing as hell. And then Manny is so relieved. Oh, thank goodness, there's no such thing as hell. And wow, it's amazing. And then he stops for a second. He starts thinking, oh, but what about all the bad people? And then Jay says, oh, don't worry about it. There's a place in heaven where they're kept, and they've got it all figured out, so don't worry about it. And then Manny's like, okay. And then Manny's like freaking out again, like, what if they break out of that place? And what if they put the wrong people in the wrong place? Because paperwork, these people, they always get the paperwork wrong. What if they put the wrong people in the wrong place? And Jay is kind of freaking out. No, don't worry about all that. They've got it all figured out. And then he says, maybe there's no heaven also. Maybe there's just no heaven. It's just, and he's like, it's just a hunch. And then Manny is panicking. He's like, you're playing pretty fast and loose with my soul. Like this is stuff that is too difficult to digest. And the important thing about a story like that is that we all have a sense of judgment. We all have a sense of judgment. And the day of Christ is the perfect day of judgment. It is the day of judgment by a judge who is pure and blameless. There's no guile in him. There's no corruption in him. And all his judgments will be just. And for us, the word of life is that Jesus has become the object of judgment so that we can become objects of salvation. He has become our deliverance. He has become our hope. And he offered himself to come under the wrath of God so that we can come under the grace of God. And that's why the day of Christ for us is not a day of fear. It's a day of hope. It's a day of joy. It's a day of anticipation that we can experience that joy now. But even now, we're called, because of this day of Christ, to shine like stars in the sky and to lead people home. And let me close with this. The word of life is that Jesus is the true and bright morning star. He is the brightest star in the sky. The best hope against any obstacle is a better opportunity. And the best alternative to any offer is a better offer. And what Jesus is giving to us is a better opportunity and a better offer than anything the world can give to us. Because what he's saying is in 2 Peter, Peter says this, we also have the prophetic message as something completely reliable, and you will do well to pay attention to it, as to a light shining in a dark place, until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your heart. And he's referring to Jesus being, Jesus coming into your heart, and a new day begins, a new start, a new beginning, because he is the true bright and morning star. In Revelation, you get the same image where Jesus says, I, Jesus, have sent my angel to testify to you about these things for the churches. I am the root and the descendant of David, the bright morning star. I am the bright morning star. So if you think about what he's saying is he is the star that when he rises in our hearts becomes the beginning of a new life, the beginning of a new day, a better opportunity, a better offer than anything the world has to offer. And you think about Jesus, he is the true Son of God who did everything that his Father commanded him. And he did it without grumbling, without questioning. He is the true child of God. He's the true Son of God who was blameless, without blemish in a crooked and warped generation. And he is the one who shines like a star in the sky. And he's the brightest of them all. And he is the one that if we look to him, we will find our way home. And he's also the proof of himself. His resurrection is the proof of life, that he rose again from the dead, and he defeated the thing that no Caesar in history has ever been able to defeat. He has overcome death. And because he's overcome death, by fixing our eyes on him, we can have hope that we can overcome all the obstacles that we face in our lives. He is the true bright and morning star. We close with a story. There's a pastor who once told the story of talking to his child about the functions of the different functions of the body parts, and he was kind of pointing to her head, and he touched her head, and he asked her, what is the head for? And she says, I don't know. And then he says, go and ask your mother. And so she goes and asks her mother, and the mother says, the head is for thinking. So she comes back and says, Daddy, the head is for thinking. And then he puts his hand on her stomach and says, what's the stomach for? And she says, I don't know. And then she says, go ask your mother. And she goes to the mother and asks the mother. Mother says, the stomach is for eating. So she comes back and says, the stomach is for eating. And then he puts his hand on her heart and he says, what's the heart for? And this time she doesn't need to go to her mother. She knows the answer. She says, the heart is for loving God. The heart is for loving God. That is its design, that is its purpose, that is where it will find its ultimate fulfillment. That is where it'll find its home. And that's what I want for you. Because, no one will ever love you the way that Jesus has loved you. No one will give to you as much as he's given to you. He's the only one who gives to us more than he takes from us. Everything else will take from us more than it gives to us. And I'm not a good enough preacher to convince you about how much Jesus loves you and how he loves you more than anything you can even imagine. But I want you to know it. I want you to know it. This is the kind of love that he offers to you. And I want your heart to be fixed on him, to be set on him. Because if your heart is set on him, then you're set for life. And that's my prayer for you. That you will fix your eyes on Jesus, your heart will be overcome by his goodness to you so that you can overcome every obstacle that you face and you can shine like stars in the sky in a dark night.